Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here and for joining us for our second webinar in this series, Disability and Art series in partnership with the South Carolina Arts Commission. We're so excited to have you here today, and I'm going to fill in for Amanda here and talk to you just a little bit about our collaboration and our project. The mission of the South Carolina Arts Commission is to promote equitable access to the arts for all people in South Carolina. In support of this commitment, at the end of 2022, SCAC launched the first round of Arts for All grants. And really the goal of that is to help equip arts organizations with the resources and support and funds to identify programmatic issues, website issues, architectural barriers within organizations that are excluding patrons with disabilities. In the first round, SCAC awarded 24 Arts for All grants, Arts for All SC grants to organizations throughout South Carolina who were willing to take the steps to remove barriers and seek to be more accessible to all patrons. These organizations have worked closely with Able to receive technical support and assistance throughout the journey and to become more accessible. SCAC is excited to launch the second round of Arts for All and inviting current operating support grantees of SCAC to apply. Accessibility really is a journey. We're going to talk about a lot today, and we're all at different stages. And Arts for All SC is intended to help support organizations where they are and help them move forward towards their accessibility goals. And the partnership with SCAC and Able South Carolina has really grown so much over the past years and has shaped this webinar series as just another resource for the arts sector, because when we know better, we can do better. Just some of the technical assistance offerings that are available through Arts for All, inclusive disability policies and procedures, building disability inclusive leadership and community partnerships, accessible communications, that can be PDFs, PowerPoints, your website, inclusive programming, and then website audit follow-up consultation for folks who had a website audit, got a report, and go, what now? So those are some of the offerings, and we're going to dig into our presentation today, but feel free to reach out if those are things you feel like you need support with. My name is Mary Reaves. I'm the Director of Community Access here at Able South Carolina, and I'm really excited to be able to be here today to talk with you about program accessibility and making your arts programs accessible. So to do that, I really want to talk to you about why this is important. People with disabilities have long been part of the artistic community and have been making art for as long as it's been around, art, music, theater, dance. But unfortunately, people with disabilities often don't have access to places where we make art, are not included in art making activities, spaces, and welcomed there. So here there's an image of Alan Holdsworth. He was a singer, songwriter, and activist. And you can see in this image here, he's sitting on a stool, holding a guitar. There's a whiteboard behind him, and there's someone else sitting in the foreground on the floor, and curtains behind him, and looks sort of like a music writing session. His music addressed civil rights, disability pride, social injustices. He was a crucial voice of the movement. He had polio and often used a wheelchair. And his work really was to end the telethons that I'm sure many of you remember that often portrayed people with disabilities as helpless, pitiful, and unable to care for themselves. In 2013, he founded the first disability pride event in the United States. But before that, in 1990 and 1992, he co-organized a block telethon. It was high profile, it was all over the place, and really helped put an end to those telethons we used to see. Another just figure that I want to draw your attention to is Judith Scott. She's a sculptor. She was born with Down syndrome. She spent nearly 40 decades institutionalized, and she had a diagnosis of deafness. Well, she was deaf. It was undiagnosed, And she, in this institutionalized setting, was not even allowed to use crayons. Eventually, her twin sister did help her escape institutionalization, and she lived with her sister and started making this beautiful fiber art when she was 45. She now has fiber art pieces all over. She's internationally renowned for this. And I think these help us set off our discussion about why. Why does it matter? And why is it so important that we make our programs accessible? A little bit about who we are, though. So Able South Carolina, we're a disability-led organization seeking transformational changes in systems, communities, and individuals. We're the state's oldest and largest center for independent living. We have a staff of about 65, 85 to 90% of whom are people with disabilities, like myself. Visible, invisible. We practice co-equality, disability justice, and representation, and true inclusion through community-driven independence and disability pride. And the thing is, we didn't just learn this, we live this. It doesn't end when we leave the office. It's really part of who we are. Our mission is an organization of people with disabilities leading the charge to do three things: equipping people with disabilities with tools to foster pride and direct their own lives, educating the community, like we're doing today, to challenge stereotypes and eliminate barriers, and to advocate for access, equity, inclusion at the individual, local, state, and national level. And we are really doing that on a national level in many, many ways. Our vision is that South Carolina is the national model of equity and inclusion for all people with disabilities. And the image here you see is 2 years ago, I think, we, at our South Carolina Access for Independence Day at the State House, where we focus on helping members of the disability community speak with their legislators and talk about really important topics: transportation, housing, barriers. Some like the things that we're going to talk about today. So, what do I hope you leave with? I really want you to understand considerations for creating an inclusive environment. I want you to be able to identify barriers to equitable access in a variety of settings and across disabilities, not just physical, but really everything. And I really want you to find ways that you can include everybody in everything. So, my silly image here of wheelchair, air quotes, friendly stairs. Here you see an image of some stairs that just happen to be painted blue and white with Bob, as we sometimes call it, the international symbol of accessibility, the wheelchair symbol, the person in a wheelchair, painted across these steps. This is a great example of just because we see a sign doesn't mean something is accessible. And the world really is full of well-intentioned people trying to make things accessible, but so much is missed and so much is really misunderstood. So we're going to start with some common barriers, then tap into program inclusion, and then end with steps that you can take with you to implement back in your programs and really make an impact. So what are some common barriers to access for disabled patrons? First, this image we have here, this is Venus and Andromeda from Kinetic Light. They are an incredible group of wheelchair dancers. I believe almost all of the members of the company use wheelchairs. I've seen them perform. They are incredible. And this is an image of them taken from the stage. So what are some barriers? Getting to and from the art center. Might be a transportation barrier. Maybe it's not on a bus route. Maybe like some places I visited, the bus route is a block away. The sidewalks are in disrepair, or maybe there is not a ramp, or it goes all the way around the back of the building. So just sometimes getting there. Information on the website, is it up to date? Does it provide screen reader access? I mentioned web accessibility, and those are some of the things that we can help with. If you don't know what this question even means, talk to us, we can help. When someone gets in the center, Is there accessible signage? Can we wayfind? Do I know where things are? How about pathways to bathrooms, classrooms, seating areas? And then sensory. Are sound levels inside and outside of performance and exhibit areas? Are they loud? You know, do you have your music blasting into the lobby when a performance is going on? What about lighting? Is there strong overhead lighting? Is there going to be flashing lighting? Sometimes these are barriers, and you know, my goal here today is not to tell you to change everything you're doing, but just to give you things to think about and to consider so that folks can plan. So why are we talking about physical accessibility? 1 in 3 people in South Carolina have disabilities. That's huge, right? We are above the national average of 1 in 4. So 1 in 3 in South Carolina. Physical barriers are also the primary reason that people with disabilities, why we don't have access to services in our community, including theater and dance, art classes, music classes. But then also it's the law. We're required to provide physical accessibility. And a lot of times folks think if their building is new, it's already accessible. Oh, we're good. It's pretty new. Someone did it. Or if someone recently renovated a bathroom, maybe it's accessible. But that's not always the case. I've got an image here of Boyd Saunders. And you'll notice I've included art throughout this presentation created by people with disabilities, because there's so much out there, and I feel like that often gets overlooked. And so I want to share that with you today, and I've got my references available for all of those. So this is September Folly, painted by Boyd Saunders. In 95, Saunders, who was already an artist before then, was diagnosed with an acoustic neuroma. He had a long surgery to remove this tumor, lost vision in his left eye and hearing in his left ear, but then went on to continue to paint beautiful art like this that you see, a raised house with a sunset behind it. So let's talk about understanding our requirements. On the previous slide, I said, is the law, physical accessibility. So what does that mean? Well, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, says that all Title III entities and Title II are required to provide access to people with disabilities. So Title III is a public accommodation, a place that provides a public accommodation. So that means anything that's open to the general public: a grocery store, a library, a legal office, a school, hospital, museum, art center, park. Basically everything is a public accommodation, unless it's a state office, agency, federal building, and then those have their own set of laws that still require access. Websites also must be accessible, and the services that are provided on that website. So, you know, registering for a class, purchasing tickets, watching a video, all of that is required to be accessible under the ADA. It also requires that barriers are removed when readily achievable. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Additionally, it requires effective communication. So that means things like American Sign Language interpreters or captions on all videos, audio descriptions, assistive technology, things like that. But beyond it being the law to provide services and provide access, really the critical priority, as the Department of Justice has outlined, is integration. One of the main goals of the ADA is to provide people with disabilities an opportunity to participate in the mainstream of American society, doing what everybody else is doing, right? I just want to do what everybody else has access to do. Public entities also must make their programs, services, and activities accessible to people with disabilities in the most integrated way possible. Separate or special activities are permitted. That's allowed under Title II and Title III of the ADA to ensure that people with disabilities receive an equal opportunity to benefit from programs, services, or activities. But here's the caveat. You can't deny a person with a disability access to, finger quotes, the regular programming. And this image is Galen Lee. Galen is a musician, public speaker. I highly encourage you to watch her Tiny Desk, NPR Tiny Desk performance. She's fantastic. We invited her to perform at Fundable a number of years ago, our annual fundraiser, and she's an incredible storyteller and an advocate for the disability community, and the assumption that, you know, because of the way she looks, she can't be a musician, and she challenges that stereotype daily, and she talks a lot about integration. So I kind of chose her picture here very purposefully. But let's talk a little bit more about integration and maybe some separate special activities. So maybe let's say a county has a summer program for kids with disabilities in June and kids without disabilities in July. They can do that, but the county still has to allow the kids with disabilities to attend either session. You know, if someone with a disability said, well, I can't come in June, I'd like to come to the July programming, they have to be allowed with some accommodations provided. So maybe another example, a rec department sponsors a separate basketball team for wheelchair users or provides a sports program with modified rules to participate in the activity. Maybe a museum that offers a tour for people who are blind and has touch tours, for example. But then, you know, making sure we're not excluding maybe a blind or low vision person from the standard tour. Again, we go back to not wanting to be special but equal. And really the ADA requires all programs to be accessible and requires that programs are held or moved in accessible locations. So we'll talk a little bit more about that too. To give you a little idea of some accessibility barriers, we're going to dig into that, and I've got some actual examples to show you. But first, this painting by Ibrahim Nubani from 2006. Ibrahim is a Palestinian artist with schizophrenia, so a psychiatric disability. And I just loved the colors of this. You know, we've got blues and greens and black and white, and we could probably spend a lot of time thinking, you know, evaluating this and studying this and seeing lots of different things, but it's beautiful. And I wanted to share this with you also. So how do we determine physical accessibility? Well, the DOJ, the Department of Justice, gives us a checklist of things, what they call the readily achievable barrier removal. And they really talk about priorities. And based on the 4 principles recommended by Title III regulations, and those are priority 1 is accessible entrance into the facility. And I talk about this a lot. If I can't get in the door, it doesn't matter what you have going on inside, right? If I can't give it in the parking lot, the door, all those things. Priority 2 is access to goods and services. Priority 3 is access to restrooms. The ADA does not say that you have to have restrooms, but if you have them, they have to be accessible, at least one, or at least a portion of. And then any other measures necessary. So we're going to hop into these by each priority, and I'm going to show you some photos. So priority 1, accessible entrance to the facility, and I've broken this down by parking lot. So we've got the chat feature set up. So what I would love for you to do is tell me, what do you think is wrong with some of these pictures? And while we're doing that, I'll describe these really quick. So we've got our top left image is a parking lot with some faded lines and a sign that just has a low post that just has the international symbol of accessibility and not really a path or anything. Can't really see much else painted on the parking lot there. The image below has some really nice new painted lines. I don't see any signs, but I do see painted on the curb blue. It says handicap and medical. And then we've got some arrows pointed on some of the other spots. And then in the largest picture on the right, handicapped parking only, we've got a sign and it's in front of some stairs. So, all right, awesome. I saw a couple answers come through. So someone said a sign missing from the bottom picture. Yep. Yep, faded lines on that top one, absolutely. And on the far right, accessible entrance near stairs. Yeah, true. And that's not a great picture. There was a ramp, but what I want you to identify in these is the top one, there's a sign, but it's not appropriately mounted. It does not have the appropriate verbiage. It needs to say reserved or accessible parking only, something like that. The lines need to be painted. It needs to be clearly marked, and it also needs to have an access aisle, which is what we see on that bottom image. That wide path with the horizontal stripes, or the diagonal stripes, excuse me, that indicate don't park here, because this gives room for a person to, exit their vehicle if they're using a wheelchair or mobility device. That makes sure their door can open, they can get that device out and hop into it. The other thing is the word handicapped. It's actually not in the law anywhere. It dates back to like the 1400s. In England, when a law was passed that said people with disabilities were permitted to put their cap in their hand and beg for money on the side of, on the street side. And so when we think about that, that's sort of demoralizing, right? Like, that term is not in the law. It dates back to this idea that people with disabilities needed to just beg for money. And it is not a word that we want to see used. And it's actually, so when we're thinking about that, that's one thing that always stands out to me. So I want to encourage you, accessible parking, and just kind of kick that word handicapped out of your vocabulary. So those are our images. We do need to have a safe path of travel. We need to have parking. And if you're curious about number of parking spaces, that really kind of all depends. You are required. Oh, that's the last thing there. I don't see anything that is a van accessible parking space. You're required to have at least one van accessible space. Even if you have anything under 50 parking spaces, at least one has to be van accessible. And that's a little bit wider of an access aisle, to make sure that those vans can get in there. So that's also missing. So our next images here, this is still barrier priority 1 at accessible entrance to the facility, but this is the path of travel. So same thing. Pop in the chat what you see here, and then I am going to describe these images for us for accessibility. So the image on the left, we have some asphalt with a marked white walkway, a gentle slope that kind of goes into a parking lot between some wooden fences, and looks like it goes right into a parking space. And then across the lot is a building, and it looks like straight away we can see stair entrance. The other image to the right is a driveway with a curb, and then some grass that leads to 4 stepstones, and then a brick pathway. So what do we see wrong here? All right, I have got, someone said there is no ramp access to that right picture. Yeah, it's just a curb. And that those stepstones don't look level. Yep, absolutely. So you can't get to that. And actually where I was standing and taking that photo, there was a bench and a really nice place to sit out across from this area. Folks used it for lunch, and this was the only way to get there. So we had something that was provided not even in the facility, but was provided at the facility, and there was no access there, which is a barrier. The picture on the left, folks said you can't see a ramp. That's true. There was a ramp on the far side, but the bigger issue with this one was we have this path of travel that leads us right into a parking space. So what if a car had been parked there, and they were actually earlier, and we waited to take this until the car left before we got a chance to take a picture with it there. But then what? And also there's no designated path getting to the entrance. And so, having to cross a parking lot. So a number of issues there that are going to create a barrier to getting inside. So next, we're going to talk about barrier priority 2, access to goods and services. So can I purchase your tickets? Can I talk to folks and ask them questions? Can I sit in the chairs? So we've got some images here. Again, I'd love for you to identify things that you see. So top left image here, we have a picture of some seats in a theater. You've got a carpeted area going by, and you can see the little round blue picture of Bob, the international symbol of accessibility, there on the edge. And then our bottom right picture shows us the countertop at a bar area, snack, canteen, concessions. Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. A concession station. And there is there's a measurement there and a tape measure there, and it's showing us at 40, right at 48 inches high. And then we have, on the far right, we have an outdoor ticket booth. Kind of looks like a bank teller thing, but it's a ticket booth with glass and a little oval cut through. And you can see the height of that one is about 50 and a half inches. So let's see what we got in the chat. Oh, I love it. Somebody has already been doing some of their homework. So there is no place for the wheelchair to go in this wheelchair seating. And you're right. If you look at this image, so a person maybe using a wheelchair could transfer into that seat if they wanted to, but a lot of folks don't want to. Bringing a comfortable power wheelchair that's been measured for you, or even the ability to move into a seat. So it's required that you have a place for, as Dory in our office often says, she brings her own chair, and she'd like to be able to keep her chair. There's no companion seating for that. So if someone were to stay in their mobility device, their wheelchair, power wheelchair, whatever, it's blocking the pathway. There's no path around. So this is not compliant seating here. The other image, the concession stand, it's too high. Really counter height needs to be 34 inches. And the same thing with the ticket booth. So these are examples of barriers to goods and services. So am I saying you have to they would need to tear down this concession stand? No. This is when we provide a program accommodation, where maybe we have someone who could come around the side and provide checkout or take someone's order. Or maybe there's a cart off to the side that is a little bit lower. You make a second concessions area. Maybe you have a mobile cart that walks around. So there are ways that we can get around this barrier, but we can't get around the barrier if we don't know it's a barrier, right? Same thing with our ticket booth. And this organization told me they don't actually use this outdoor ticket booth. Most tickets are purchased online, or folks come inside. But say they decide to start doing that, it's important to know that this is not going to work for everybody. This would be a barrier for many people. So just a few examples. For the seating, I will say, yes, they do need to remove some seats. There does need to be a place that is designated for folks who use wheelchairs or mobility devices. So that's going to require some renovation and some structural changes. Get my slide to work here. All right. Additionally, contained here in barrier priority 2, access to goods and services, is signage. And I happen to have these examples of all restroom signs, and barrier priority 3 is a restroom, but that really talks about the actual restroom itself. Wayfinding is barrier priority 2. Can I figure out where I'm going? Can I figure out what you have? Where are your offices? So we have some examples here. A restroom sign, it is mounted a little bit too high. You can see it's saying And what we do is I measure to where the braille is, the dots, and they're at 60.5 inches. The middle image is a restroom with the sign on the wall. The third image is a restroom with the sign on the door. And so each of these is an issue for varied reasons. The braille is a little too high. It really needs to be down about 1.5 inches. And maybe you're like, why does that matter? 1.5 inches. Thinking about someone who's blind or low vision, who's orienting themselves to a location, if I have gone through orientation and mobility training, and I know that I can, depend that signs should be at the same height. And I'm looking for the restroom, I'm looking for information, I'm looking for the office. And the sign is too high. Is my hand going to go right past that? Am I going to miss that information? So it's important for things to have that standard because that's the expectation. And if you're searching for information, having it be in the a dependable location is important. The other signs, the one on the door, let's think about this kind of same thing, looking for information. Is this the correct restroom? If it's on the door goes open. Let's say, that could be a fall hazard for a person who is blind or low vision looking for that information. So it really needs to be on the latch side of the door signage. And I'm happy to give folks any more information that you need about specifics. That's a support we can provide for you. But again, these are simple things, right? And we might look at that and go, if we're walking through and we're not really sure about accessibility and go, oh, I see the sign. It has braille. I know that's a thing. Yay. Yes. But if it's not in the right place, it can be almost as much of a barrier as if it's not there at all. Additionally, some signs. This is important to know. If all of your restrooms are not accessible, or do not have at least one accessible stall. An accessible stall really needs to be 60 by 60 inches. So there's a lot more features that go in, but just sort of thinking about that. It's not a lot of times folks will see an ambulatory stall. That's the one with just two, still kind of narrow, but has two grab bars on the sides. That is not the same as an accessible stall. So important for you to know, if all your restrooms are not accessible, or have an accessible stall, you have to have signage that says where the accessible restroom is. That's critical. And it needs to be a compliant sign with braille. If your primary entrance is not accessible, you also have to direct to the next accessible entrance. But here's the thing, 60% of your entrances must be accessible. So if you only have 2 doors, then they both have to be accessible. And a lot of folks don't know that. And they might, all too common. And this is something that I hear a lot from my friends who have physical disabilities or mobility disabilities, is it's always in the back, oftentimes by the trash. Nobody wants to enter there. Again, if you have 2 entrances, 60%. So both. If you have a no pets policy, that's fine. You're totally allowed to have a no pets policy. But if you have that and there is signage, you have to include signage that service animals are allowed. And I do have some resources at the end if you're not sure about the rules for service dogs, service animals, guide dogs. Happy to reach out and support you. Again, resources at the end of this presentation, but that is it is a requirement under the ADA. Bathrooms. So the DOJ put this as barrier priority 3, but I will tell you, so often the issue for many people with disabilities and going out is bathrooms. They're just not accessible. They're notoriously problematic. So I want you to tell me what you can see in these images, just like before. And while you all are typing out some things in the chat, I will describe these images for us. Top left, we have what looks to be an accessible restroom. We've got grab bars. We've got a toilet seat mounted to the wall. We have 2 toilet paper dispensers. One is high up on the wall and larger. One is lower and closer to the toilet. Bottom image, we've got a public multi-user restroom with a row of 3 sinks, 3 mirrors and soap dispensers. And then the far right, we've got, I would say, kind of your standard fast food restaurant restroom. There's a stall, there's some soap dispenser on the wall. We've got one of those sinks that kind of goes down a little bit and then cuts back closer to the wall. And then paper towel dispenser over on the side and mirrors. So let's see, what did folks say? Okay. Hard to see, these look accessible. Someone said the sink on the bottom left, the pipes are exposed. Yes. So that is something that can be a barrier, can be a danger, a hazard to folks with disabilities, is the pipes aren't covered. That's a requirement for ADA, is that all exposed pipes are insulated and covered. Think of maybe someone with a spinal cord injury and lack of sensation on their legs, and they roll in with their wheelchair, washing their hands. The hot water is on because it's cold outside and they're like me, and warming up for a second, and that hot water goes through that pipe and burns their leg before they even notice. So that's a big safety hazard. Doesn't matter if it's your accessible restroom or not, all pipes need to be exposed. All exposed pipes need to be insulated and covered. So a couple of additional things that we see here. Those twist knobs on the faucet, those are not compliant. Those are not accessible. When I go in and test, what I usually do is I test things with a closed fist. And so if I can use a door handle this way, can I push on a sink nozzle, like on the far right, you see it's one that you can kind of lift up and direct. So there's a couple things there. The soap dispenser is too high and too far away. The mirrors are too high. They need to be at 40 inches. So there's all kinds of standards. There's all kinds of things that can be barriers to accessibility, to inclusion. To go into the bathroom, and I've gone to the theater on a date, and we had dinner, and I want to check my makeup. Can't see the mirrors too high. Does this mean that all mirrors need to be removed or lowered? Just provide one. If it's provided, generally speaking, if you are providing something, a feature, a service, a support to the general community, at least one of those has to be accessible. So if you have a mirror, you need to have one mirror that's lower than 40 inches. Ideally, they all are. We're talking a lot in the accessibility space about universal design, and this is really the idea. There's 7 principles, but that everything is accessible to everybody. And so we have varied opportunities for things. So our top left, show you just a couple more. So what I suspect happened is the first toilet paper dispenser was that top one, way out of reach. So the bottom one was added. Totally fine. You can have 2. That's totally fine. But this one had one of those mechanisms where the toilet paper doesn't roll and you couldn't get it out. We've all been there, right? Like little teeny pieces of paper, and actually you can see some on the floor. And the ADA says you can't have, I don't remember exactly what they call it, like a stopgap on not a stopgap. You can't have a tightener on the toilet paper so that you can't get it, because that can make folks, with mobility disability. I have Raynaud's, my fingers go numb very often, and it makes you not be able to do things. And so that is a barrier. I can't access toilet paper. That's problematic. The far right image, again, looks pretty good. One of the things is, even though that sink looks like it has what we call knee toe clearance, which means someone using a wheelchair could pull all the way, could roll all the way up to the sink, safely access the soap, which the soap is mounted to the side. It looks great. Paper towels are low, but it's not actually compliant. There's not enough room for knees to go all the way in there. It was just like 4 or 5 inches off. So again, this is one of those examples where we see something that looks like it's pretty good, looks like it's accessible, but still might be creating a barrier for folks. So I know we're moving through a lot, but I really just kind of, again, want to give you things to think about. My hope is that you'll go back to your office, your program, your theater, whatever, and walk around and go, could this be a barrier? Could this make folks with disabilities not feel welcome and included because we've got all these things happening? We've got all these barriers. The last is barrier priority for other measures necessary. And there's a lot of things that go into this. This might be a telephone. We've got a water fountain here, your fire alarms, all kinds of things. I'm happy to tell you a little bit more about barrier priority for, but that will kind of depend on your program. But there's a lot of different things that could be encompassed in that. So those are our 4 barriers, 4 barrier priorities based on the checklist from the Department of Justice. In a minute, I'm going to talk to you about some of the findings that we did and when we did our architectural assessments at organizations that were common. And all of these came from visits that we have made around the state to various places. So those are all actual examples that we've found. But before we do that, because we're talking about arts orgs and, or because I'm talking to arts organizations, in my search for, information and accessible art spaces, experiences, I found so many incredible people, like I told you, and I loved this one. So this artist is Shannon Finnegan. And as an installation, it highlights really so much of what we find in art spaces. Mobility is a required aspect of enjoyment. You got to move around. You have to walk through the theater. You have to stand. But what if we rethought what that looked like and what it requires? And she sort of challenges us to think about, can we remove barriers and create art? And I love this piece, and there's another one further in the slides here, but it's a blue bench. It's wooden, it's angular, it's doesn't look super cushy comfortable, but in white letters it says, "I'd like more time with this artwork, but all the standing is painful. Sit if you agree." And this one is from a museum in the city of Frankfurt. And the title of this installation was, "Do you want us here or not?" And I love that. And I feel like that speaks so much to what we're talking about today, is how do we tell people, all people with disabilities and non-disabled people, how do we say, I want you here. I want you to be part of what we're doing in our organization and our mission and the art we make and the community that we have here. Intentionality is required for that. And so let's talk about the common findings in the art programs. So we looked at 15 organizations between April and September, and that accessible entrance to the facility, priority 1, 44 different findings. Most of them were parking signs, ramps, paths of travel, doors too narrow. 32 is the minimum, 36 is recommended, and y'all, we found places that were like 24 inches. That's major. And it's not inexpensive to widen a door to a main place, but it's required. Again, if I can't get into what you have, it doesn't matter how great it is. It doesn't matter how much you want me there. For access to goods and services, we had 28 findings. Counters too high. Looks like I didn't finish my sentence there. Ticket counters, things like that. 43 findings for restrooms. Lots and lots and lots of places just didn't have an accessible restroom. And this is one of those things to highlight. The ADA says, if you pull a permit to do any renovations, there are things that you have to bring into compliance. So something to think about. And if you're not sure what that means, if you're planning some renovations and you have some aspects of your space that are not accessible, give us a call and we can help kind of guide you through that. And for other things, other measures necessary, 14 findings. This was things like a washout sink at a public art center was not accessible. It had all these barriers to someone getting to the sink. So lots of things like that. So again, that's a lot of barriers for just 15 organizations, right? A lot of things that might make it difficult for people with disabilities. And this is from the physical aspect. So what can you do? Well, let's say you don't have a ramp. and, you know, small nonprofit, and you don't have the however many thousands of dollars it would cost to put a ramp in. Have a portable ramp. We loan those out to consumers, and you know, we've purchased them before. They're not incredibly expensive. Great to have. A lot of cities. I know City of Columbia a number of years ago gave them out to businesses. I think they had a set number, but so there might be, your city might be able to, maybe your town, maybe there's some organizations that might help you get a ramp. Maybe that's what you could write in another Arts for All grant and support some of those efforts. So you have an event, maybe provide complimentary valet parking. Find a sponsor for this. It's great for patrons with a disabled placard. So you're having an event, and you know you've only got 2 accessible spaces, or maybe they're problematic. Provide valet. That's what we do at all of our events. Utilize temporary ground coverings for event spaces that are not stable, firm, and slip resistant. I did not use that verbiage before. Stable, firm, and slip resistant is how we determine a pathway is accessible and safe for travel. I've got some resources at the end for how you can provide ground coverings, but let's say you know, you have an outdoor patio, and there's plans for it to kind of spill out into a grassy area. There are ground coverings that you can get that are accessible and would make a path of travel to make sure that someone who uses a mobility device could get there and still share that same experience. Ensure you have directional signage. Again, if you are not sure what that looks like, let us know, and we're happy to help. But let's say, you know, you've got 3 entrances to your building, 2 are accessible. Put some signs up so folks know where to go. The goal is to prevent backtracking. So let's say, you know, someone has limited mobility and but using wheelchair, using crutches, for example. Preventing from having to go all the way around the building just to find out that the accessible entrance actually was just right over here around the right side. Signs are great. It really helps prevent undue travel and difficulty just to get into a building. Have wheelchairs available for use for borrow. That, you know, a lot of folks do that. Provide an accessible map, which is not super easy to make, but we can help you out with that. Or a description of your venue so folks can plan accordingly for snacks, for restrooms, for parking. You know, if you have 2 accessible restrooms and only, or you have 2 restrooms and only 1 is accessible. Something else I've got a resource for at the end is having an accessibility page on your website. But one of the things that you can say is, you know, our accessible restrooms are located on our 1st floor to the right of the ticket counter. The last thing is maintain what you have. A lot of folks think, well, someone has come in and they've said it's accessible, so we are all good. Nope, not necessarily. Maintain your surfaces. If you have handrails outside, make sure they're not chipped. The paint is not peeling off. They're not rusted. Check batteries in your automatic doors. This is something the folks ask me a lot. Do you have to have automatic doors on your main entrance? No, the ADA does not say you have to have those. But if you have them, they have to work. Because then otherwise you provided an accessibility opportunity and it's not working. So then you've limited accessibility. So maintain that stuff. Check your batteries, check your paint, your surfaces, walk through your restrooms, you know, make sure your doors have automatic self-closing features. If not, sometimes it's just tweaking those hinges, checking your interior doors. There is a requirement for how heavy they are. Generally speaking, if you can push it with 1 finger, it's about 5 pounds, and that's what the requirement is. And that's usually something that's adjustable with your hinges too. So walk around your property every so often, take a look at things, see what might be a barrier to people with disabilities coming in, a physical barrier. What if you can't remove the barrier? What if it's going to cost, $50,000 to put a ramp in, and there's not a slope to allow someone to get into the main entrance? Maybe you deliver your services at an alternate location, or you relocate them. You have an art class, and you have had a person with a mobility disability register. Well, maybe you move it to the building next door, or you don't have an elevator, and typically you have your classes on the second floor, move them to the first floor. So thinking about, just because we've always had it here, do we have to have it here? How can we navigate this? Maybe you have a storefront in your museum, and you've got things that are inaccessible because they're up too high. Maybe you just make sure your staff are aware that they can offer assistance, and should offer assistance to anyone who comes in, not just someone they perceive to have a disability, but anybody. Hey, if you need help getting anything off the top shelf, let me know. Again, the concession stand that's too high. Maybe you have a moving cart for beverages and snacks that goes around the venue. Recently visited a place where the only accessible restroom that was located close to where services were happening was an employee-only restroom. So maybe you open that up, and it isn't employee only because it's the only accessible one. So just kind of thinking outside the box. Alternatives. What can we do? And I've got a few more ideas about this in program accommodations in the next section, but these are some quick and easy examples. All right, so next we have how do we create a welcoming and inclusive environment? This is another image here from Shannon Finnegan. This one was from the Carleton University Art Gallery. And this is another blue chair, wooden, sitting in a museum space here. And on the wall in red letters, it says, "In service of the alchemy that happens when disabled people are connected." And I loved that. The seat says, "I would rather be sitting, sit here if you agree." And then the step stool is, "I need a break, rest here if you agree." And again, I love this. This is still from her exhibition of "Do you want us here or not?" So let's hop into barriers for program accessibility. How can we create spaces unintentionally, I believe, that are not welcoming and not inclusive? So maybe there's no effective communication. Maybe there's no assistive listening system provided by the theater company. Maybe the after schools program website is not accessible by people who are blind or using a screen reader. Maybe your policies and procedures, things like requiring a driver's license to check out art equipment from a class. No animals rule without an exception. Digital accessibility, maybe your website or the app that you use is not accessible, and you have an overlay. That's that image on the bottom. If anybody has one of those, watch our next couple webinars, because you're going to get a lot of information about why these are really problematic. They actually create more inaccessibility in many instances. Maybe provide videos throughout your space, but none of them are captioned. Or maybe there's not an audio description. So these are just a couple of examples of barriers to program accessibility. So what can we do about that? One thing we recommend is, and I mentioned this before, is providing information that allows people to plan. So if I know what to expect before I get there, I can go, okay, all right, well, I know this aspect is not accessible, or this policy is in place, so I can be prepared to ask or talk about that. And one of the ways that you can do that is to think about what you want to know before you go someplace. We've talked with a lot of organizations that have sort of a know before you go. So think about what you want to know, and then, we ask that you transition that to thinking about this from those alternate perspectives. Some of those, again, mobility disabilities. Where are the restrooms? What's your parking situation? Where's the accessible entrance? For folks who are deaf or hard of hearing, will there be an interpreter? Is the video captioned? Will the movie have open captions? If not, what night do you do that? For folks who are blind or low vision, will there be audio descriptions of whatever is taking place? Are the digital documents that you're provided, maybe your program, that you have a QR code, is it digitally accessible? Can my screen reader access it? Can my voiceover system access it? For folks who are neurodivergent, do you have sensory rooms? Are there loud sounds or bright colors in this performance? Are there busy or less busy times to visit? Recently saw a museum that on their accessibility page, big shout out to them, gave times, typically, busier times are between 4 and 6 p.m. and, early mornings on Saturdays. This is awesome. It's great information. Again, it's not about changing what you have. It's about providing information so folks can decide what to do and when is best for them. So moving into some program accessibility examples of ways that you can provide program accessibility. We talked about this, reassigning services or classes to accessible locations. Maybe provide more places to sit, rest, observe, like those Shannon Finnegan examples that I gave. Purchasing equipment, adaptive art tools available, adjustable tables. Excuse me, and I will say, there are lots and lots of ways that you can make adaptive art tools and provide program accommodations really, really, really cheap. I'd love to give you ideas for that if you need those. Auxiliary aids and services to ensure effective communication. So that might be Braille, that might be an interpreter, that might be something like an Ubi Duo, which is something that we have in an office that allows you to communicate with deaf and hard of hearing folks. Maybe you converting your information to plain language. And we have another training where we're talking, or another webinar coming up, and we're talking more about plain language. So if you're not sure what that is, tune into that webinar. But basically it is creating, putting your content in ways that everybody can understand. And then structural changes if there's no other option available. Few more of those. So thinking specifically about maybe in contemporary and classical music settings. So this may not seem like accessibility in the way that we've been talking about, but this is that inclusion and welcoming environment. Letting the conductor or performers share about their disability, ensuring that you have people with disabilities as part of your company. In theater, huge. We talk about this a lot, and this is growing, especially as we're watching more movies, from Hollywood and Broadway, of people with disabilities performing the roles of the person with a disability. And that's one of our biggest sort of positions that we have here, is not having non-disabled actors play the roles of people with disabilities. Just don't do it. If you have a role coming up and you have someone with autism, expand your outreach. Look to the community, find a person who is not neurotypical and is an actor, because they're out there, I promise. And really including that, but then taking it a step beyond that. So you have a role and the character doesn't have a disability. Still inviting folks with disabilities and including people with disabilities into those roles, and thinking about things in a different way. In dance, when you're moving into more production type organizations, encourage work from dancers with disabilities. I showed that video of Kinetic Light, actively seeking out performers with disabilities and really promoting inclusion and invitation. And I think, as we've moved through this project with the Arts Commission and been talking with members here, staff and employee here and volunteers here at Able, but also with members of the larger disability community, it's, if I don't see myself as a person with a disability represented in who you have on stage, who's on your, who's on your social media, who's being shown in your advertisements, maybe I don't go there. Maybe I'm not welcome there. So expanding your your opportunities and access is really how we feel included. And again, I already said this, but ensuring non-disabled actors and performers play the roles, do not play the roles of disabled characters. All right, I talked a little bit about effective communication. What is effective communication? Well, first, it's required by law to be provided. And the ADA does say that public entities must ensure that applicants, participants, members of the general public have communication access that is as effective as that provided to people without disabilities. And they must give primary consideration to the communication preference of a person with a disability. And we do go a little bit more into that in one of our later webinars when we're talking about understanding disability rights laws. But the ADA really does emphasize that governmental entities must provide effective means of communication to people with visual, hearing, speech, and cognitive disabilities. The communication must be provided in a manner that enables people with disabilities to participate in or benefit from the services. And I already said an equal basis with others. There is the caveat, unless to do so would result in a fundamental alteration of the program or an undue financial or administrative burden. I will tell you this. It is real hard to show an undue financial burden. And I've spent 20 years working in the deaf and hard of hearing space and have a lot of folks say, well, we can't afford to hire an interpreter. Yes, you can. When we're looking at undue financial burden, a lot of times folks are like, well, my program budget is like this big, super small. Undue financial burden applies to your total program, your total operational organizational budget. Unless you can show me that the $280 that it costs to get an interpreter for a 2-hour performance is an undue financial burden to your whole organizational budget, then it still needs to happen. Oh, and this image here is of our CEO, Kimberly Tiso, sitting on the State House steps, and that is a sign language interpreter, actually a good friend, Sharon Reed, on the steps next to her. And this is just an example of providing effective communication, of having an interpreter there to make sure that folks with hearing disabilities have access. So some examples of auxiliary aids for communication. I already said interpreters. We've got transcription services. So maybe you have CART provided, which is the live running captions that you'll see places. Video remote interpreting is also available for folks with speech disabilities. Maybe we have a speech synthesizer, a computer, tablet, phone apps, communication boards. There's a ton of really cool things. I mentioned Ubi Duo is a device that we have here at our office if someone with a hearing disability walks in and there's no one available who can sign. And then for folks with visual disabilities, alternative formats like large print, Braille, ensuring that screen readers are accessible. We talked a lot about that. And then there's a link here that I'll make sure is available for lots of other types of aids, because we're not going to go into that too much more than that. So moving on from those effective communication, one of the other ways that we can promote inclusion and a welcoming environment is thinking about the language that we're using. Because language really does matter, just like our slide here says. So there's a couple different ways that we think about language: person first versus identity first. Person first language puts the person before their descriptor, while identity first language leads with the descriptor. So individuals may have preferences on what types of language they want used. And so, my advice to you is use the language that the person that you're talking with or about uses, how folks describe themselves. Again, I worked in the deaf community for a long time. And you notice I say the deaf community. My capital D deaf friends who are involved in deaf culture, American Sign Language users, will say I'm a deaf person. But then there might be lots of other folks who say I'm a person who's hard of hearing, or I'm a person with a disability, or I will describe myself as I'm a neurospicy person. So language matters. How we use it matters. And I've got some examples for you. And a little caveat here that these words a lot of times make a lot of folks uncomfortable. The ones that you see that have an asterisk are considered slurs. Well, not the one with the asterisk at the end, deaf, but the others, and I'm not going to say those today. But I want to share them with you because I think that unfortunately a lot of these words are still in our, everyday lexicon, and so challenging us, myself included, to think about those. So people with disabilities, and this is a big one, not differently abled, not special needs, and not handy capable. Those are just a couple of those. And then the disability community is pretty vocal about that. Might you run into an adult with a disability who says, I have special needs? Yeah, maybe. Again, and then you follow the language of the person. But generally speaking, the disability community, we want to be called people with disabilities. Disability is not a bad word. It's an okay word to use. So we have people who are blind, people with low vision, not blind, not visually impaired, people who are deaf, people who are hard of hearing, not hearing impaired, people who are of short stature, people with learning and intellectual disabilities, people with psychiatric disabilities, people with speech disability. I want to go back to, I said, myself included a minute ago when talking about language. The C word, crazy, has been in my everyday rotation for a number of years of just, I have 3 kids. Oh, my kids are C word. Oh, my day was. And so we all have things. I mentioned at the outset that accessibility is a journey. Inclusion, and thinking from an inclusive mindset is a journey, and language changes. And so one of the things that we ask you to do in this webinar is to be intentional and, again, know better, do better. And I share that with you that I'm doing the same thing. I'm actively thinking that word really might hurt my friend's feelings. Might make someone feel that they're not welcome here. And so if I can change the language that I use and make one person feel included, I'm going to do that. And so I offer that opportunity for you too. Okay, so I have shared a lot of information with you today. We've talked about a lot of things. So I want to leave you with what do I do? With some action items, right? Sit through this webinar, listening to me talk, and then go, what do I do? So first one is start where you are. Accessibility is a process. It takes time. Secondly, invite disabled creatives to join your program. If you don't know how to do that, reach out to us. But get involved in the disability community in wherever your town is. We are not the only Center for Independent Living in South Carolina. There are 2 others, Accessibility and Walton Options. Depending on where you're located, reach out to them. Reach out to us. Come to events. We've got things that happen all the time. Follow us on social media. Come out and start meeting members of the disability community. Find the creatives, invite them, have them join what you're doing. The third, and I'm surprised I didn't say this already because normally I say it like 15 times, create a budget line item for accessibility. If you don't have one, do it now. Don't wait for your upcoming budget. Do a budget amendment, submit it to your board, do whatever you need to do. Intentionality for accessibility inclusion is really required to make it happen. If we don't fund it, we're not going to do it, right? I've been in nonprofit world a long time. If there is not money for it, it ain't happening. So make it happen. I mentioned this before. Number 4, walk around your property periodically. Think about how hard or easy it is to navigate and start making a list. Maybe you have volunteers who can help you, maintain some things, or handrails need to be painted. Maybe you just didn't realize that on the side of the building to one of the other accessible entrances, the folks who do the landscaping haven't been edging that walkway, and there's some issues there. It's not being well maintained. So keep an eye out for those things. The fifth is create a disability advisory committee. Or, if you're a smaller organization, a member of your board. We do something called the, oh my goodness, the C is leaving my brain. The CLA, a Leadership Academy, where our goal is to help folks with disabilities learn how to serve on boards, provide support. So reach out to us and we'll get you connected and connect you with Dory in the CLA if you're looking for folks to join advisory committees. The sixth, when you announce programming, immediately publish info about accessibility features that you have. This is something we say all the time, brag. Don't be afraid to brag about what you're doing. Like, hey, we have ASL interpreters. The first showing of each new production that we have. Shout that from the rooftops. Put it on your social media. Let us know. We'll share it everywhere. But when you're providing these accessibility features, tell people. I date myself every time I say this, but Kevin Costner, Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come, but they ain't coming if they don't know you built it, right? Provide captions for any posted content. If you have videos on your website, we were auditing a website recently, videos there, and there's probably the opportunity to add captions, but I can't remember what platform they were using. It was like Wix or something that didn't allow that. Well, go stick it on YouTube. Make sure the captions are there. Auto-generated captions are not always accurate and can sometimes be problematic. Check your captions. You can edit those on YouTube and then embed that on your website. Super simple fix. If you are working with other creatives and they're submitting artwork, maybe you're putting on a display, an artist telling about their story in their exhibit, require them to put captions on it. If you don't have the budget to do it, have them do that. It's really easy. Got some great resources that you can use where you can, upload your video, and there's some places in $110, they will burn in your captions of an hour video. It's easy. It's cheap. So there's not an excuse for it not to happen. Lastly, and I said this, include images of people with and without disabilities in your programming, in your studio, in your work, everywhere. If I don't see myself represented, maybe I think you don't want me. So start thinking about that. There's lots of resources available, even if you're just using, I just blanked on what it's called, images that you can go get for free. And you're thinking, okay, how can I diversify what's there? You can find free images of people with disabilities too. So thinking outside the box and making sure that you are intentionally creating welcoming and inclusive environments, accessible environments. And it really is easy to do. So, again, if you aren't sure about your facility or your programming, give us a call. I referenced all those TA offerings that we have before. Please reach out. We'd love to help you. I'd love to come take a tour of your facility. You can show me what you've got. I can point out some things that maybe we need to think about. Lots of options. So I challenge you really to change the face of what people think art looks like. I challenge you to actively and intentionally work to change the expectations, ideas, perceptions. Open your doors and invite people with disabilities to learn from and to create with you. And I hope to be part of that journey with you. So I'm going to open it up here to some questions. Thanks, y'all. That was a great conversation. So I've got resources here, lots of those that I referenced. These will, of course, be available for you. The Access Board, if you're not sure about physical accessibility, Kinetic Light, the wheelchair, the disabled dancing group, folks who use wheelchairs, adaptive art tools, all kinds of resources here for you. I really try to put together a lot of stuff. Service animals fact sheet, if you're not sure about that. Link to Shannon Finnegan's art, Galen Lee, Nothing About Us Without Us, Disability Arts Now. They've got some really great resources. And then also, I said, call us, and I mean it. Sarah is our community access specialist. She does all of our website, digital accessibility, website audits. If you got one of those website audits and you're not sure what it means and what you need to do, Sarah will help you do that. If I mentioned overlay and you saw that little symbol and you're like, ah, give us a call. We can help you out with that. And then finally, I do hope that you will tune in for all of our upcoming webinars. March 6th, we have alternative formats and accessible communications. April 3rd, building inclusion through employees and volunteers with disabilities. May 1, what is website and document accessibility? Talked about that one. That's where we'll talk a little bit more about overlays and stuff. And then June 5, understanding disability rights laws. We'll go into a little bit more of ADA, Title II, Title III, effective communication, all those things. So the series is repeating. They're from 3 to 5 on Zoom. You do need to register for those the first Wednesday of each month, but they are being recorded. So check the Arts Commission website to find all of those. And thank you all so very much for your time today and all the great questions and discussion at the end. I love that. And I hope to see all of you soon.